governmental office. These members' reasons for joining the now ruling party were generally quite different from those which led people into a persecuted and illegal party with its risks of exile, imprisonment, or death. In the Soviet Union during the Second World War, joining the party was, for many recruits, just another aspect of patriotism, at a time when loyalty to the regime went hand in hand with loyalty to a motherland under mortal threat. In the relatively tranquil years, by Soviet standards, when Leonid Brezhnev headed the Soviet Communist Party between 1964 and 1982, acquiring a party membership card was much more commonly related to career advancement. It was a fact of life that in all communist countries, ambitious people tended to join the ruling party. It is one reason why in the first 2 decades, since 1989, former communists have continued to be quite disproportionately well represented in high positions, including the top political offices, in many of the post-communist states. My professional interest in communist systems began in the early 1960s, when I was an undergraduate and graduate student at the London School of Economics. By 1964, I was lecturing on Soviet politics at Glasgow University, and before the end of the 60s, I had launched a course there called The Comparative Study of Communist States. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, I taught a similar course with a different title at Oxford. The subject of comparative communism, which emerged in the late 1960s within the study of politics, was both a recognition that communist states had enough in common to be grouped together as a quite distinctive type among the world's political and economic systems, and an acknowledgement that there were differences among them sufficiently great to require analysis and explanation. Over a period of 40 years, I visited many of the communist states while they still were, or are, under communist rule, and the people I met there ranged from dissidents to members of the party's Central Committee. The majority of those with whom I spoke fell into neither of those 2 categories. Many were party members, many were not. It is helpful, when coming to write a book like this, to have had a variety of experiences, from warm friendships and cultural enrichment to secret police surveillance and time-wasting bureaucracy in these countries while they still had communist systems. It is no less of an advantage, however, to be writing now that most of these states are no longer under communist rule. Many archival materials have become available, including minutes of Politburo sessions and transcripts of meetings between communist leaders from different countries, which were beyond the dreams of scholars a few decades ago. People who were leading political figures in communist states can be interviewed, and numerous revealing memoirs have been published. Communist systems had a number of essential things in common, in spite of the many peculiarities which distinguished one country from another. There remain at least some common features among the 5 remaining communist states: China, Cuba, Laos, North Korea, and Vietnam, although the differences between, for example, China and North Korea are enormous. It is important to examine those features that make it meaningful to call a system communist, although that is not my starting point in this book, since history should preferably be written forwards, not backwards. First of all, in Part 1, I look at the origins and development of the idea of communism, and then what it meant in practice up to the outbreak of the Second World War. That occupies the first 5 chapters. I turn to the question of what we mean by a communist system only in Chapter 6. The greater part of the book is naturally concerned with the post-Second World War period, for until then there was only one major communist state, the USSR, and one minor one in terms of population and influence, Mongolia. The very fact that the Soviet Union, the revolutionary successor to Imperial Russia, was the first country to establish a communist political and economic system, meant that it profoundly influenced the organization of subsequent communist states, even in cases where the regime had not been placed in power by Soviet force of arms. Although I pay attention to non-ruling communist parties, and to the reasons why some people were drawn to these parties even within democracy,